Welcome back to the Nick Bartlett Show, everybody. And joining me on the show today is Bryan Brown. Bryan covers the sport for College Football Network. And me personally, I originally heard him on the Locked On Pac-12 podcast. He was also the host of the Locked On Utes podcast. And so thank you for joining me on the show today, Bryan.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nick. It's great to be here. It's been a minute since the Locked On Pac-12 podcast. Spread my wings a little bit into more of a national role, but always enjoy reconnecting with people and obviously talking about my hometown team, the Utah Utes.
Yep, awesome. And so today we're going to talk about Utah's outlook this season and really their potential run to the college football playoff. Should the Utes be the favorite in the Big 12 and the ever changing world that is college football? As always, be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter as well, but that's the one for YouTube. Without further ado, let's get to the question. So, this can be a long-winded question here just to start. Fair warning. This feels improbable, but could Utah's biggest weakness be their offensive line? I know they return two guys in Mokafisi and Fanu, but is there anyone else I should know about? Or is potentially their biggest weakness their secondary? So warned you is going to be long-winded. Bottom line is, do you feel Utah's biggest weakness could be their offensive line or possibly their secondary?
I think it is the two biggest question marks on the team for me with Utah. Maybe mix in running back somewhere along the lines there is last year's starter and Bell College, Quinton Jackson transferred to Arkansas. But the big question with the offensive line is just experience. They've got a lot of highly rated guys in the program. Mentioned Spencer Fano. He started as a true freshman, took his lumps. He's a four-star prospect, can play anywhere across the front. Looking like he might start at right tackle this year. They've got another four-star, Caleb Lomu, who could move into that left tackle role. But it's about finding the best five, I think, for Utah. There's, again, a lot of talent. Tanoa Tongiai played a little bit at left tackle last year. He looks like he's going to slide inside to guard, which I think is a better position for him. You mentioned big question marks. I think the biggest thing is the center position. It's been a bit of a swinging door for Utah for a while. I won't say that it's full-on defensive against the dark arts, at Hogwarts, but they've had some struggles ever since Orlando Umana transferred a few years ago and Nick Ford stepped into the role. It's been a little bit of an inconsistent with the position. So the player I guess I would point out to watch would be Jaron Kump. Can he step up and really become the guy at center? Khalif Ayu, who started a few games last year, ended up transferring out of the program after spring. That's usually one of those telltale signs that either somebody within the program played well enough to take his spot or he just was, unhappy with whatever's going on. Utah's not one of those programs where guys transfer out very consistently. And so if a guy is leaving, it's usually because of the lack of playing time. So Kump really is the answer for that one. The secondary, it's Zamiah Vaughn and whoever else plays next to him. Vaughn is a long, athletic, physical corner, had a good year last year. Looks like it's going to be the transfer Cameron Calhoun from Michigan who will start outside of him. But again, it's a spot where they don't have the typical experience and depth that they've had in years past. And so I think those two question marks really stand out on a team and a set of units that really does have a lot of depth and a lot of answers coming back for the 2024 season.
Yeah, and I feel that Utah's offensive line. You give me hope with Kump at center, as long as he can kind of perform. I would imagine that Utah's offensive line should be all right. Just it's Utah. The one thing, the one thing that does concern me though, I'm a big safety guy when it comes to the defense, and you're talking about losing Cole Bishop, second round draft pick to the Bills. You're talking about losing Sione Vaki. I know that everyone talked about him as running back. He was a defensive player first. He was a defensive player first, right?
He was first and foremost. Well, I mean, if you really travel back in time, he was a wide receiver in high school. So just an incredible athlete. But really where he made his mark at Utah was as a safety and a hard-hitting, athletic, physical safety. And to your point, you're replacing two really good players, consistent players that have been in the program for a while. So I do expect there to be a gap. I don't know necessarily that there's going to be a drop-off because Teo Johnson, who played a lot at the nickel position, ended up sliding back and playing some of the post safety there for Utah, the free safety position, as people like to call it. And he'll likely be the starter, and it's just determining who's going to take over that Cole Bishop role where you can be the physical enforcer, where you can come downhill and really stop the run game, which for Utah is such a huge part of their identity on defense. It's everything starts on stop the run, and then we'll do the rest. As they go into the Big 12, where there are so many talented running backs, and I know people love to point at the air raid, but they like to run the football in the Big 12 too. It's a little bit of a different kind of running game, so it's going to be really critical that Utah fills that position now. Whether it's John O'Hall who takes over, or Nate Ritchie, or a combination of the two, or maybe someone else who steps up throughout the course of camp. That'll be the $1 million question, I think, for the defense. But Morgan Scalley, he's been there for a long time. He coaches the safeties. He got the head coach in waiting title this offseason. He'll have his group ready regardless. But I think, to your point, you look at the strengths of the team, and secondary is more of a question mark defensively than, say, linebackers or the defensive line.
Yeah, and then I'd say just to kind of round out that thought, Vaki was a fourth-round draft pick, to the Lions. So you lost, again, two starting safeties, both to the NFL, and it's not like these were late-round draft guys, second-round and fourth-round picks. And you touched on all the guys coming in. Moving forward here, the last kind of potential negative before it gets a little funner here. So this is seriously the question I have every single year for the Utes. Plain and simple, do they have that game breaker at wideout? Do they have that game breaker at wideout?
It's a question that people are going to ask until it actually happens, right? And they continually think that they have the problem solved, and then something happens or something comes up. And so I will give you names. I don't think I can answer that one. They feel very confident that Dorian Singer, the transfer from USC, is going to be the guy that can come in and stabilize that position and give them a game-breaking wide receiver. If I don't know how many of your listeners watched the Utah spring game, but he was a focal point of the offense, had a bevy of catches, and he and Cam Rising have really developed a rapport and some chemistry. They'll try and use Brant Keithy as a wide receiver and in the slot as much as possible, but Singer is really the guy that I think they're putting their hopes and their dreams on right now. They also picked up a younger transfer, Lyons from Washington. They have returners Manir McLean, who was a transfer from USC, and then Micah Pittman, who transferred from Oregon, then Florida State, and is now at Utah, who got injured last year. So there are guys within the program. I think they think very highly of Money Parks, but if you're going to single out one name, it has to be Dorian Singer. And they really haven't had a go-to electric wide receiver since Darren Carrington way, way early on in the era.
Yeah, and those are the kind of the two names I had down there. So Dorian Singer, if you guys follow the Pac-12, what was the Pac-12 at all, transferred from USC in Arizona, been all around the conference. But back in 2022, Singer had over 1,000 yards. Money Parks, feels to me he's going to somehow be good enough. I mean that with like the utmost respect. Basically, what I'm trying to say is in a Kyle Whittingham system, he's going to make the right plays. I'd say, maybe 400 yards, just making a couple third down catches and moving the chains. He's a more experienced guy. He had 293 yards and 2 touchdowns last year. So, those are the names I've kind of heard. And it really feels like with all the kind of little stats thrown in there that, like you said, essentially we're going to wait and see if Dorian Singer can really be that guy. Moving on to the funner stuff here. How good should we expect Cam Rising and Brant Keithy to be?
It all depends on the health, but if early indications are any sign of that, they should be really, really good. Rising mentioned that he is eligible for an 8th year, but I think 7 is enough. And so they're both planning on coming out this year and really establishing themselves. And, early on and before both of them got hurt, they were really electric, and they have that connection. They've been in the program together forever. And so it's for Utah fans. I think the bigger question is just who the backup quarterback is right now, because they know how good Cam Rising can be. And when Rising plays his best, Utah is electric. He's one of the best efficiency quarterbacks. I don't know if that's necessarily a phrase, but he's one of the more efficient quarterbacks in college football. And to have his favorite receiver in Brant Keithy, I think that's a big step forward for them. It's a big safety blanket for him. But again, to your point, they're going to need another wide receiver to step up. Money Parks has had some success. If he can be a good possession guy and, struggled a little bit with drops here and there. But the other thing they really need to work on is getting a deep threat. And Rising has mentioned that that's something that he's really trying to work on is the deep ball. one of those things that stood out in his NFL evaluation. So he and Keithy will take care of the mid game stuff. That's always been where they've been so great and been able to connect. It'll be everything else that I think Utah fans are excited to see if they can really bring to the table. But really, I think anyone who's ever built a house or even just talked about building a house knows how important a foundation is. And when two of your foundational players are Cam Rising and Brant Keithy, that's going to lead to a pretty good foundation.
Yeah, and so I think everyone at this point probably knows who Cam Rising is. Obviously, yeah, I don't even want to throw out stats from him. I have them written down. I'll just say this: back-to-back Pac-12 titles in 2021 and 22. How's that for stats? When it comes to I mean, come on. When it comes to Brant Keithy, I think I think he could be the best tight end in the country. I don't claim to have the deep knowledge on the East Coast guys as I do on the West, but I see no reason why he couldn't if it wasn't for injury. He's a monster. He is the reason why I played basketball, not football. Guys like that. Yeah, I would just say if you don't know who Brant Keithy is, you're going to find out if he's even remotely healthy.
Yeah, he's a matchup nightmare, and to your point, just he is still flying under the radar. I think nationally, by comparison, now people know the name, but outside of really his game down in Florida, where he kind of put his flag on the map, I don't think people really know Keithy the way that they might know some of the other great tight ends that are out there.
Their favorite player is going to find out very soon who he is, because you don't want to tackle him, you don't want to be blocked by him. I enjoy watching him play. Moving forward here, and this is going to be the last of kind of your more standard football questions before we have a little fun with the schedule. How good should we expect this defense to be returning 8 starters?
It's going to be really good, and not just 8 starters, but 8 of the best players that they've had in the program up to the point. I think it all starts and ends with Lander Barton for me, for the most part. They do have a lot of returners. There's Van Fillinger on the outside, and he'll play in a variety of roles. Junior Tafuna on the inside. I think Simone Peppa is a name that he struggled with injuries a little bit throughout his history, but when he's right, he's just an absolute presence on the interior of that defense. But it's Lander Barton that I think fans will have a full experience of this season, and he was injured last year, so he didn't get to play the full season, but he is such an electric athlete. He has all the abilities of an NFL type linebacker. He's almost 6'4", 250 pounds, just an incredible athlete. And so they'll line him up everywhere. He'll be on the edge, he'll be in pass coverage, he'll be rushing the quarterback. He'll definitely be in the mix on stopping the run. He's a guy that I really expect to do big things this year, and he'll have plenty of support around. Karene Reed returning at the linebacker position is a big addition for Utah, even though they lost Levani Damuni, the Stanford transfer, in the spring session. So he'll be the anchor of the defense. We talked a little bit about the safety position not necessarily having the same amount of experience, but they do have a lot of good athletes there. And obviously Zemiah Vaughn, I do believe will show out to be a shutdown corner like we've seen in the past from Utah. But that defensive front goes deep, and they are talented. Keanu Tanavaso, especially in the interior, there are just a lot of names, and so there's a lot of potential for that defense to be really good, which it's been Utah's hallmark and their calling card. You have to believe that that's what Kyle Whittingham is going to focus on as they go into a new conference for a second time in his tenure. And so he knows the recipe. He knows how to do it. He knows it all starts with defense. And so I expect that this will be one of their best defenses. Now, how they accomplish that, whether it's through sacks, whether it's through turnovers, that I think will be the really interesting question. But it does feel like they've really ramped up in terms of trying to get pressure on the quarterbacks, and they feel like they can create a lot of opportunities that way.
Yeah, I mean, and if kind of just looking from the outside, you already touched on essentially pretty much all the players I was going to say. Just kind of always look at the game like I played Madden. Again, I said this last week or whenever the last interview I did was, I know NCAA football is hot right now. I always look at it as Madden. And you're just looking at Junior Tafuna, Keanu Tanavasu, and Van Fillinger on the offensive line. That's going to be, you can't really stop that when you have 3 guys that good. You're talking about that should easily be able to replace Jonah Ellis. I know there's some question marks there. When you have three guys, I don't see why there should be any problem getting some pressure on the quarterback. Touched on two guys at linebacker. Obviously, I had my one question earlier about the losing two safeties, but when you're returning 8 starters from a defense that allowed 19.3 points per game last year in a Pac-12 that had probably some of the most elite quarterbacks top to bottom in a long, long time, expect good things. Looking at moving forward here, this is where we can kind of get a little local, I guess. So talk to me about November 9th. That sounded so much better when I wrote that out in question. That sounded corny, but honestly, so just this is the first time Utah plays BYU since 2010 in the middle of a conference season. This is what you told me essentially since the Mountain West days. What's the atmosphere going to be like? Utah versus BYU conference matchup again.
It's going to be chaotic. It's a conference matchup. It's a return to the rivalry for the first time as conference opponents in over a decade. It's going to be a strange kind of almost middle of the season matchup. I guess bottom third, but it's a game that traditionally Utah and BYU fans are used to either playing at the very beginning of the year or at the very end, and so I think all that factors in. Plus, the fact that Utah is coming in as the conference favorite more or less, and BYU is down there towards the bottom. And I I know as someone who's associated with the Utah program, I shouldn't say nice things about the opponent, but I think BYU is poised to be a little bit better than maybe some of the odds makers are rating them at, and maybe some of that is just because the BYU fan base doesn't bet as much as some of the others. But it's going to be a hot ticket here, and it's we were talking before the show a little bit. It is an intense rivalry, and it is around you at all times. It's families, it's religion, it's government, the schools are 40 miles apart, so you really can't avoid it. And I've had my eras where I kind of got sick of the rivalry and maybe voiced my opinion a little too much about that. I'm glad that it's back. I think it's good for both sides. I think it's great for the state of Utah because this is a football hotbed, high school all the way up through college. This is a great football state. There's a ton of good football here, and if that rivalry can bring more attention, especially on the national stage, then we're all better for it. Even if it does, take a pound of flesh every year when it comes around.
Yeah, no, and then yeah, I mean, like you're saying about BYU, I haven't done my deep dive research on them this year. I do feel though, I know they're predicted kind of 62nd, around 6 wins. As you touched on, opportunity to showcase Utah on a national stage, but I do feel like you mentioned with Keilani Sitake in charge at BYU, I still feel he's a good coach. I know last year they had some problems, but he's a man I'd put my money on. Going back to your kind of reference there, but I get so yeah. Bottom line should be a heck of a matchup. Moving forward, kind of sticking with the schedule, and this I think this might catch some people off guard, but I feel it's the truth. Looking at Utah's schedule this year, I personally feel they could go undefeated. I think they're ranked like 14th according to Athlon. But looking at their schedule, is there a matchup that scares you most?
There is, and it's that very first conference game is they traveled to Stillwater, Oklahoma to face off against the Fighting Gundies. And I think Utah is the prohibitive favorite. They've got a strong program history. You're coming off 2 Pac-12 championships back to back, and the program's at an all-time high. Recruiting is great, blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. But the Big 12 is a different animal, and I've been to a game in Stillwater before. It's an intense environment. When they start slapping those boards against the padded wall, the sidelines are very, very tight. That stadium, you're right on top. It's very similar, I think, in a lot of respects to what a game at Rice Eccles is like. But Stillwater is a different environment. There's nothing. You think, people may say that Pullman is out there. Stillwater is literally in the middle of nowhere. There is not much out there other than football and education. And even the education part, I think, sometimes takes a hit because it's just Oklahoma State. But that's going to be a game that I'm going to point out right off the bat and say I think these are the 2 of the better teams in the conference, and Utah's going to have their chin strap buckled up because Mike Gundy is a great offensive mind. He's a great offensive football coach. The struggle with Oklahoma State has always been consistency in defense, and it looked like maybe last year they started to figure that out. Gundy mentioned obviously in the press conference against Big 12 or at the Big 12 media days that Ollie Gordon's not going to be suspended, and so that's another Styles make fights kind of match up there. Utah's run defense against one of the best rushers in the country. And so I think that game is going to dictate how a lot of things will go for Utah. The non-conference is a little soft, right? You got Southern Utah, Utah State, and then you have a weird non-conference but conference game against Baylor, a game that was already on the schedule. But what could you do about it? So it won't count toward the conference total. But all that being said, I think that game on September 21st is going to be a real barn burner, and it kind of kicks off the meat of the schedule for Utah because then it's Arizona at Arizona State, TCU, a former conference opponent when they were in the Mountain West together, at home. It'll be the first time the Horned Frogs have been there since one of the more epic games in Utah history back in 2008, the second time that Utah went undefeated. So, and then you talk about again BYU on the schedule. You play at Colorado, and then you finish the year in what I think could be a really dangerous game at UCF on Thanksgiving weekend. So if I'm going to choose a game, I think that Oklahoma State game stands out first, but the very next one would be UCF. It's a long road trip. Thanksgiving weekend. It's at the end of the season. It's right before the conference championships. So if ever there was a time where you could possibly stub your toe, assuming that Utah does win out, that one really stands out to me. But it's a weird schedule because they don't play Kansas or Kansas State. You don't get some of the higher tier teams in Texas Tech or higher tier teams in the Big 12, I should say. But you do get, Iowa State's a sneaky good opponent. I think they returned something like 21 of their starters this year. So the schedule's not by any means soft, but you kind of start when you're ranking them as that Oklahoma State game and then UCF, and then you kind of slot everything there. Obviously, the rivalry game is a rivalry game no matter what. You throw out all the stats for that one because it's just going to be a battle.
Yeah, and so I think we all kind of knew the Oklahoma State game obviously should be a top 25 team with Ollie Gordon. As you mentioned, Oklahoma State always feels like they have a bunch of super explosive playmakers versus which Utah historically could be considered maybe a more of a tempo offense, at least in comparison to Oklahoma State. But I guess one thing that did catch me off guard there, I was listening to there's a national podcast doing some research for this, and I know the guy's based out of Orlando. All respect, he seems like a cool guy. I do different things than try and pick battles. But in all seriousness, he said the UCF game was going to be tough, and I think UCF that's kind of down the Orlando area. So it surprised me that you said that as well, and I definitely take some validity in that now. Didn't realize UCF was quite that good.
They're a good football program. I think they value themselves very highly, as everyone on the internet will tell you. It's one of those fan bases that kind of has a reputation that precedes itself. I just think there's a lot of factors in that game, right? You're coming from cold Utah in the middle of November, going to what's likely humid and warm, middle Florida, and Utah fans will travel in mass for that because they want to go to Disney World and then catch the game. So there's a potential for a lot of distractions. Again, mentioned the Thanksgiving holiday, so I think we'll call him a plucky opponent plus lots of off the field potentials. Kyle Whittingham is really great at getting his teams focused in when their backs are against the wall. It's been a little bit of a different story when they've been leading from the front at times. The 2021 season, they started off a little bumpy in terms of trying to get the handle, and it eventually finished off as Pac-12 champions, but lost a few games there and had some quarterback issues, and eventually Cam Rising took over the spot and everything was okay. But I think that UCF team, that I think they would love to be the upset darlings if it comes down to that. Like if you could beat Utah and prevent them from making it to the Big 12 championship game, what team in college football doesn't want to do that, right?
Yeah, for sure. In Utah, as we kind of touched on with the schedule, if they can handle that Oklahoma State, Arizona, maybe a team like Iowa State, that UCF game really could be to spoil their college football playoff. This isn't some kind of ballooning it. This isn't some kind of homering it. Utah really has that potential this year. Moving forward, so these are kind of my last two housekeeping questions. I guess last three, but they're all kind of simple. Any unit or player that I'm missing? I know we got Jack Boomeister, 20 punts inside the opposition's 20. Sorry, I had to steal that one stat. And then what about potentially Micah Bernard? Or is there someone I just completely whiffed on?
Yeah, Bernard is a great surprise athlete. He's kind of a slash player. would have been a much bigger part of Utah's offense last year, but had an incident off the field with I believe it was scooter accident. I don't know if that was ever reported, but that was the scuttlebutt around here. And so he wasn't able to play or practice for almost the entirety of the season, but showed up in the bowl game. So it's good to see him back and physically healthy. One player I would say, Bomeister can absolutely boot the ball down the field, and that's a big part of Utah's philosophy is pinning opponents deep and playing the field position game and being able to possess the football. One player I think that might surprise a lot of people this year is Landon King. He's a transfer from Auburn. He's kind of a hybrid tight end, wide receiver type player, and Utah has had a ton of success with those kinds of players in the past. You could see it early in the spring game that he's a very athletic, very difficult matchup for some people. Another one to watch, and I'll just throw this name out there because with all the news that happens, I'm sure some people miss it, but Caleb Lohner, the basketball player from Baylor who started out at BYU, actually transferred to Utah to play football. And so that'll be an interesting one to watch as well. I don't know that he'll have, the same amount of time and snaps as some of the other tight ends in that group, but Landon King is the one that I think most people will be pleasantly surprised. He was very productive last year in a limited role. I had 3 or 4 touchdown receptions, I believe, and he's going to surprise a lot of people. But you're on the right track there with Jack and Mackay too. So they're great players, and Bernard's been in the program for a long time now. He knows the expectations, and he seems very, very ready to have a breakout season this year.
Yeah, and going back to, I hadn't heard of Landon King, but you'd expect with all the attention that Keithy's going to draw and Cam Rising's veteran experience and Kyle Whittingham, obviously utilizing the whole team. That's something that Utah does. You'd expect him to get open. Bottom line, you expect a lot of attention to be on other guys, maybe even Dorian Singer. All right, so I guess did maybe you just steal my next question? Did you answer? I was going to ask, do you have a favorite player on this team? Is it Landon King, or kind of was there,
Yeah, I would probably say Landon King. He's a really fun, energetic guy. I got to know him a little bit when I was doing some work covering the Utes a few years back, and he's a great one. If you're a fan, it's hard to really say anybody other than Cam Rising just for what he's done for the program. But there are some, I really like Landon. Another one that I really kind of sneaky have a little man crush on is Dejon Stanley. I don't know how much of an impact he'll have, overall on the team, but he could be kind of a nice little spark athlete that comes in there, kind of a slash player, will play some running back, some wide receiver, but he's very explosive, very fast, and just one of those people that just is go, go, go all the time. But yeah, Landon King's a personal favorite of mine. That's the one I always mention in interviews at the very least. So.
No, that's perfect. Sometimes the questions just roll together, and then we're definitely finishing out the interview here. Last question: anything else you'd like to add about Utah, the Big 12, the college football landscape, the Pac-12, the Mountain West? It's all changing. The Pac-2, my bad. Any thoughts on anything college football related?
Yeah, it's a very unique time and era in college football. There's so much change afoot. There's so many aspects of the game that are evolving, and so I think it's one of those seasons where people are going to want to pay attention, because for Utah it's going to be all new opponents, and even though they are favored within the conference, this is going to be a challenge for the program, because these aren't programs that Whittingham and company are really familiar with, and so they're going to have to be on top of things. Outside of playing Baylor last year, there's not a lot of crossover with Big 12 teams. I mean, Utah played Iowa State years and years ago, but it was kind of one of those one-off games, and Utah went out there and had a pretty explosive game. But any player involved with the program at that point in time is long gone, and 10 years down the road into whatever their off-the-field career is. So I think that's the unique part about this season. I think it's for me on a personal level, it's a bit crushing that the Pac-12 is gone, and I'll still be tuning in to watch Washington State and Oregon State. Those are programs that I really grew to love as part of the Pac-12 footprint, and I'll root for them. It's been weird watching so much Big Ten media days to try and get my USC hatred fix, and like, I guess I don't really have to hate USC anymore, because they're in a different conference. They won't really affect Utah's livelihood too much, but it's definitely a unique experience watching all these teams take new roles and new opportunities, and so there's going to be a lot of great football to watch, and hopefully people will still tune in. I'm sure people will, but more often than not, I hope fans still stay invested in it, because that's really the sport is great because of the fans. The players do all the hard work and play the games, but it's the pageantry, it's the fans showing up. We were talking about stories, from history of rivalry stories and things of that nature, and I think the rivalries of the sport are really what make it such a joy. And so I'm optimistic that things will find a way, through all the weirdness and the mismatches, and that, the fans will still be a critical part of all this, and the fans will still have a good time, because if the fans aren't involved, then the sport just isn't the same. And so I hope everyone is excited as I am. I do feel like I maybe sound a little bit like Sean Foster the other day at Big Ten Media Days, where he couldn't think of anything else to say other than just, I'm excited. But, I'm going to miss the Pac-12. I really am. It was a great conference. It was a lot of fun. I got to know a lot of great people through it. And, it's part of the reason why we're even doing this today. It was just that the conference, Utah was a part of it. So you'll mix some of the disappointment with the changes, and hopefully, we'll make some memories for this season to carry forward.
Yeah, and obviously, the people watch me. They know what school I went to, so obviously, I'll be rooting for them, and all the teams that maybe kind of got slighted a little bit. But the bottom line is, there are new elements which are fun, as you're mentioning. Watching the Big Ten Network or Big Ten Media Days, you get USC information. I'm just doing my my kind of summer. I used to do kind of game previews, and that was fun. But now it's like I'm hopping from conference to conference. I was talking Mountain West yesterday. Big 12 one day, Big 10 another day, and that's fun to me because it gives me obviously not the in-depth knowledge I'm going to have on West Coast teams, but now I can tell you a team like Rutgers had a really good defense last year with Greg Schiano, and also had like the leading rusher in the Big Ten. So just random things like that, expanding my knowledge. So, but bottom line, like you said, I thought was most important. Was this is about the fans, and if the fans can stay engaged, that's what the sport's all about. There's no other way to say it. There's a passion in college football, whether it's youth, I don't know what it is, but it brings out the best in people. It just does. Singing, just doing weird crap. I wanted to use a swear word, but I'm trying to keep this PG today. But yeah, bottom line, just it's about the fans, and as long as the fans can stay engaged, I think you said it. The sport should be in a good place. So, yeah, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show again, Bryan.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. Even if I'm not involved on a regular beat, or, I love college football. I really do. This is more of a hobby and a passion for me than it is anything else. And so, just being able to talk about the ball and talk about the teams that I know is a real privilege, and I appreciate it so much. And I appreciate the work that you guys do. Uh, that site is an impressive juggernaut of information, and one that I frequently visit to try and learn about what's going on. And I think even more so this year, we're going to need a lot of that, trying to keep track of where everybody is and what everybody's doing, because it's almost, I don't want to say that it's like an ex-girlfriend, but it's almost like a college buddy that moves away. Like, you're trying to keep track of them and whatever they're doing next in their jobs. And so, I'll try and catch a few ACC games and a few Big Ten games, along with the Big 12 schedule. But it's definitely going to be a new adventure, following along with all these teams that I've in some way, shape, or form rooted for, or gotten to know over the last 10 years.
Yeah, and first off, thank you for the kind words. Like I said, all credit goes to the publisher. I don't know if he sleeps ever. Please still run this interview, no, in all seriousness, I always like and respect the type of football that's played in Utah. I love the culture. I think that's one thing. Bryan said it best. He's from there. I'm from a different place, so I'm not gonna tell you how Utah football culture is. All I can say is it feels, watching from the outside, one of the more passionate places. And obviously, you just see the talent spread. Big subsects of certain populations are in Utah, so there's a lot of football talent, and I'll leave it at that. And then the one kind of final closing thing: everyone get a good Twitter handle out there, because I remembered, like I was saying at the top, I remembered Bryan from Locked On Pac-12 and Locked On Utes. but I couldn't remember his name off the top of my head. And like I was scrambling. I'm like, who do I want to get, a Utah guy, or I always like getting someone I've heard before. And so at the last second, I remembered Brown Bear SLC, and that is his X handle. So get a good X handle, guys. With that, you can follow Bryan at Brown Bear SLC on X. Again, that's at BROWNBEAR SLC, and should be a fun year all around, and really something special could happen in Salt Lake City. We don't need to throw phenomenal, spectacular. If you follow the Utes program, something special could happen. Thank you, everyone, for watching again, and stay yourself.